I've lived long enough to know that winter in Wyoming never comes gently. It didn't knock. It kicked the door open like a drunken cowboy, scattering snow all over the ground, and then sat there, cold, speechless. That December, the wind howled through the burnt grass hills like the moans of restless souls. The sky was nothing but a dull leaden gray, and the sun was a pale blotch high above, so cold I didn't even bother to look up. I stood on the rotten wooden porch of the house, my old boots crunching on the ice. Outside was a vast, silent white field, nothing moving but the wind and the swirling snow. In the distance were the Bighorn Mountains, bare, razor sharp against the sky. I was Randy Rowe, 32 years old, but I probably looked much older. The war had taken my youth, and the death of my wife Mabel took the rest. She died in an autumn like this, her blood mixed with the yellow leaves. And I buried her on the hillside behind the stable. Since then, it's just me and the earth. And the snow, I haven't spoken much since she left. To people, to horses, to God. Some days I forget what my own voice sounds like. The house still bears the traces of a life that included love. The unfinished embroidered handkerchief she made, the cracked china, and the kitchen curtain that still smells of soap and ashes. But it's an illusion, a kind of imprisonment I've gotten used to. The house is cold, like a coffin standing in the middle of the prairie. Every day, I rise before dawn, make coffee that I don't drink half, check the fences, pour the feed for the horses, trim the hooves of old chestnut. Work is the only thing that keeps me from drifting away, like a drowning man who hasn't even realized he's drowning. But these days, the work is more than I can handle. For the past month, I've been mending a barn, delivering a cow, and fending off hungry wolves from the mountains. And now the snow had come earlier than usual. I knew I couldn't do it all myself, so I wrote a small note in a steady handwriting, as if I were writing to myself. Workers wanted board and lodging, fair wages, ask at Row Farm. I taped it to the bulletin board of the general store in Dry Hollow, the only place within 30 miles where anyone lived. I didn't expect anything. People were heading west for gold or south with the cattle, and no one had time to clean up horse manure in the snow. As I rode back, the wind clung to my back like a ghost. I saw a girl no bigger than a child hunched in front of the bakery. Her legs were wrapped in sacks, her face was down, and she held a thick coat that looked like it had belonged to a dead man. She didn't ask for money. She didn't look up. She just sat there, as if melting into the earth. But when I passed, she looked up, just for a second, a glance faster than a breath. But I saw those eyes the color of melted water, a color that couldn't be named, cold and empty, as if all her hopes, fears, self-respect had been stolen by someone long ago. I walked on quietly. I said nothing. But all the way home, that image, that small figure in the cold wind, her eyes like stone, stuck with me. This winter was going to be long. I knew. And the snow, it didn't just cover the earth. It covered my heart. I should have forgotten her like so many other lost figures that had passed through town. But when I got home, as I put the bag of salt on the kitchen floor, I still saw that image in my head. The girl with no shoes, no words, no demands, just sitting there in the snow, as if that were the only place she was allowed to be. I lit a fire, cooked soup, opened a drawer and took out the old handkerchief Mabel had embroidered with forget-me-nots. I kept it in my breast pocket, right over my heart, the only place inside me that was still warm. But that night, my hand kept groping at the edge of the handkerchiefs, without knowing why. I was out in the stables later than usual, brushing Blackie, who was feverish. My hand ran through the thick fur, but my mind was elsewhere. Every rusty nail, every crack in the wall seemed strange, as if I were living in someone else's dream. And in that dream, there was a girl without shoes, sitting on the steps of a bakery, her eyes as cold as the melting water of early spring. I didn't understand why she haunted me so. I had seen people dying on the battlefield. I had seen Mabel lying motionless in a hemorrhage, her blood spreading to the mat like withered petals. I had seen children left behind after a fever, but I had never seen anyone so hollow. Hollow without being broken. Hollow like a hole that didn't need to be filled. I put down my brush, leaned my hands on the rotten wooden fence, and sighed. There was something about her that made me uncomfortable. Not pity, not blame, but a feeling that if I didn't come back, I would carry her image with me for the rest of my life. The next morning, snow covered the tracks of the wheelchair. It was as quiet as if the prairie were holding its breath. I made myself coffee without taking a sip, then went out as usual. tears. But when I passed the recruitment post, where I had pasted the handwritten note a few days before, I paused for a moment. The note had flown away. The wind might have blown it away. Or maybe someone had seen it. I wasn't sure what made my heart skip a beat for a moment. Maybe hope or a vague fear that those eyes would come back. That night, the storm raged as if the heavens and earth were unleashing an unknown anger. The wind howled in long gusts, rushing through the cracks in the boards like the howls of wolves from the mountains. Snow pounded against the windows like invisible fists demanding entry. I sat by the fireplace, holding a cup of cold coffee, my eyes on the red ashes, but my mind wasn't there. I was thinking about those empty eyes. I should have forgotten. I was used to forgetting, but not this time. Outside was the sound of the wind. Inside was the sound of a heartbeat, slow, heavy, and uneasy. I had just put down my cup when I heard it. Knock, knock. A knock, soft, almost unreal, but clear. I jumped to my feet, my hand instinctively reaching for the Winchester resting on the wall near the door. In this part of the country, when someone knocked on someone's door during a storm, it was usually not good news. Bandits, vagrants, deserters, all sorts. I started to walk, slowly, and then heard two more knocks. Louder this time. Not hurried, not urgent, and not afraid. I opened the stable door. The wind hit my face like a cold punch. Snow was flying. And there she stood. It was the shoeless girl from the other day. The same old coat, wet hair stuck to her cheeks. Her feet were still wrapped in sackcloth and twine, now stained red from the snow or the blood. I wasn't sure. Her face was pale, but her eyes looked straight ahead. Not avoiding this time, not blank. There was something else in those eyes now. A defiant gleam, thread-like, but still shining through the storm. She said, her voice hoarse, as if she had just learned to speak again. I saw the paper. I can work, scoop manure, lead horses, clean, I don't steal, don't lie, just need a place to sleep. With some food. I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, unblinking, as if waiting to see if she would collapse right in front of me. She didn't. Standing shivering, but not backing away. As if the cold biting her teeth wasn't enough to extinguish something inside her. My name is Denise, she added, after a moment of silence. I still didn't speak. I was thinking the instinctive part of me wanted to say no. Wolves can wear human clothes. I had learned that lesson years ago. Amid moonless nights and senseless death. But the rest of me, the remaining human part of me, saw her feet losing their hoofs from the cold, her lips starting to turn pale, and her hands clutching the edges of her coat as if to keep from falling apart. I exhaled. The wind that carried that breath seemed to take a part of me away. Come in, I said softly, my voice lost in the wind. I stood aside, and as she passed, I recognized it, the smell of earth, of damp straw, of cold, dry blood, all of it followed her in, as if she had carried the storm in her thin coat. I wouldn't let her into the main house. After all, I was a man who lived alone. I led her to the stable, the warmest place outside the kitchen, and motioned for her to lie down near the hay, next to the cold coal. Denise didn't complain, didn't ask, didn't whine. She just sat down, untied her legs, and touched the horse's neck as if she had known him for a long time. I left an old blanket, a bowl of hot corn porridge, and said nothing more. Back home, I bolted the door and sank down on a chair by the stove. But I did not sleep that night. I heard every gust of wind, every creak of planks, every soft breath from the stable. Every sound reminded me that there was another person in the world that seemed to belong to me. The next morning, when I went out with the intention of giving her some hot water and seeing if she was still there, she was up early, carrying 2 full buckets from the pump. Her cheeks flushed from the cold wind, her hair tied back in a bun at the nape of her neck. Denise looked at me, not waiting for orders, just nodded, a slight nod, like an agreement that did not need a signature. And instead of asking, instead of doubting, just nodded back, a nod in response. No one said she would stay. No one said she had to leave. But in the midst of that white earth and gray wind, I knew I had just brought a stranger into my own world, and that world would never be the same again. I had no intention of letting her stay. At first, it was only for a few days to get through the storm. I had met vagrants, given them a place to sleep, shared a hot meal. But they left. They always did. Denise did not ask, and I did not tell. She stayed like a shadow, soft, quiet, and strangely not disturbed. On the contrary, she made things more orderly. I didn't notice it right away. Until one morning, I walked into the stable and saw the old saddles neatly lined up, the bridles clean, the hangers reattached with new wooden nails. I didn't tell her to do it. No one did. Denise slept in the corner of the stable, where the hay was warmest. Near the colt I named Marigold. I thought she would complain about the cold, the smell of the grass, the sound of the horses breathing. But no, she slept as if it were a familiar place, as if she had been born amid the neighing of horses and the smell of sunburned hay. Every morning, before I woke up, she was up, carrying water, sweeping, carrying wood to pile by the kitchen door. I noticed one thing. She never came into the main house. Not once. Even though my door was always open, she hovered around the barn, the well, the hayloft, as if she knew where her boundaries were, not to cross them, not to encroach. She didn't ask anything about me, nor did she tell anything about herself. It seemed like there was a silent pact between us. No need to know the past, just enough peace to live another day. I wasn't used to having people around me. For years, the farm had only had the sounds of wind, hammers, and horseshoes hitting the ground. But to her, that presence wasn't heavy. On the contrary, like another breath in a house that seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. One afternoon, I saw her sitting by the barn, her back against the wooden wall, holding a spool of thread and a piece of horsehide. The old saddle I was going to throw away, the one with the seam torn, was now lying on her lap, and she was sewing it back together with tight, even beautiful stitches like a skilled craftsman. I stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then I blurted out, "Where did you learn all that?" She didn't look up, just answered quietly, her eyes still on her hand. "I used to work on a horse farm in Montana. That was it. Nothing more. No who, when, or why not." And I didn't ask. But from that day on, I began to pay more attention. I saw her inspect Marigold's hooves as skillfully as a veterinarian. I saw the back gate that squeaked when the wind blew, now with a new latch, as still as if the wind had stopped. I saw a new patch on the winter blanket I kept in storage. Hand patch, matching thread, patched at the button. Denise did it. I knew, but she never mentioned it. I began to trunk. I left the bucket unemptied by the well. The next day, clean, upside down by the bank. I left a rotten branch in the fire pile. The next day, replaced with dry wood stacked by size. I pretended to forget to fix the latch on the barn door. The next day, the hinges had been rebolted with new nails. She saw everything and quietly fixed them. I don't know why, but that made me feel better. Not because I needed help, but because someone was also watching every little thing, as if the whole world no longer rested on my shoulders. One day, I brought her a bowl of hot soup after coming home late from work. Her hands were cold, but when she took the bowl, she said, "Thank you." Just 2 words, soft, almost a whisper. But they touched me like a note in a long unplayed song. I nodded, said nothing, but that night, I lit the fire earlier than usual. I don't know how many days she stayed. Time passed like the winter wind, not counted by the clock, but by sigh, by the melting of ice in the bowl of water on the windowsill. There were afternoons when I stood on the porch and saw her crouching over the old blind dog, the one Mabel had named Dusty. He had never let anyone else touch him. But with Denise, he lay still, his head on her leg, breathing evenly. And there were moments when I stood at the window and looked out and saw her standing silently in the snow, her arms wrapped around a bundle of firewood, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, as if waiting for someone, not sad, not happy, just something like peace that had just learned to return. I don't know exactly when I began to change. No bell rang, no earth-shattering moment. It was just one morning. I poured more coffee into a second cup and put it on the table across from her, knowing she would never sit down. Denise didn't belong in the main house, at least not in my original mind. She slept in the stable, ate on the doorstep, worked without being reminded, and never crossed the threshold of the barn as if it were a forbidden sanctuary. But little by little, somehow, she crept into my life, light as dust, but impossible to brush away. I noticed that I became quiet in a different way. It was no longer the empty, dead silence that had been there before. Now, it was more like The silence of someone who knows someone else is listening, even though no one is speaking. A silence that has a share. I found myself waiting for the sound of the bucket hitting the well every morning, waiting for her footsteps in the yard when the snow had not yet melted, waiting for her to pass by, her arms wrapped around a bundle of hay, her cheeks flushed in the wind. And whenever I didn't hear any of these things, I worried. One day, I saw her bent over the cowshed, her arms wrapped around her sides as if she were cramped. I walked over, Singingu. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? She looked up, intending to answer as usual, short, concise, but this time, her lips tremble. I guess my stomach is cold. I can keep going. Her voice was hard, but her eyes were broken, like the thin ice cracking through the first spring. I didn't think much of it. I went back into the house, poured a pot of warm water, added some ginger, and brought it out to her in a tin can. She took it with both hands, timidly, as if receiving something too precious. She mumbled, "I've never had anyone bring me hot tea." I didn't say anything. I just sat down by the fence. Next to her, we sat there in the drifting snow, drinking the bitter and sweet liquid. Warmer than anything I'd ever tasted, I began to do things I never thought I'd do again. I fixed the latch on the kitchen door. It wasn't broken, but it would let her in if it rained. I dried a pair of old boots, lined them with cloth, and left them outside the stable door. No name, no message. The next morning, they were gone. That afternoon, I saw her walking in the yard in them. Well-fitting, sturdy, but she didn't look at me, didn't say anything. Only when the wind blew, I saw a small smile flicker across the corner of her mouth. Something soft like smoke, just enough to warm my chest. Mabel had said, "When you start noticing little things, it means your heart is waking up." I used to laugh. Now I understand. I found myself standing still for minutes, just watching her wrap up the rope after herding the cows. I watched the way her fingers twisted the grass rope, the way she paused on the steps when she heard the owl hoot at night, as if she were afraid of something, the way her eyes kept glancing back at the door, as if she had been chased, abandoned. She moved like a stranger allowed to stay still. And I began to want to prove it. One night, I heard the wind louder than usual. I jumped up, put on my coat, and went to check the barn. But when I got to the door, I saw a flickering fire in the hayloft. She was sitting there, Denise, her arms around her knees, her eyes staring into the distance. Next to her was Dusty, the old dog, his head on her lap. I didn't call, Boo, didn't come out. I just stood there in the dark, the firelight reflected on her face, still young, but etched with weariness. She didn't cry, but I could see it. Something inside her was flowing silently, like candle wax melting, without a sound. At that moment, all I could think was, she doesn't just need a place to work. She needs a place to be. And who had thought she had died with Mabel many years ago, began to want to hold someone back. The next morning, while she was chopping wood, I walked up to her, not looking directly at her. "I'll make room in the shed. There's a wooden bed. You don't have to sleep under the straw anymore." She stopped. After a while, she asked, very quietly, "Am I not disturbing you?" I replied, in a low voice, "You'll make this place quieter, in a way I haven't been able to do for a long time." She nodded. She said nothing. But for the first time, she looked at me, not avoiding him, not avoiding, straight at me, and I saw that her eyes were no longer empty. Since the day I had cleared out the little shed behind the house for her, Denise had not said anything. She just nodded, rolled up her blanket, picked up her stuff sack, nothing but a few pieces of cloth, a small knife, and the ball of thread she always carried with her, and quietly walked into the old shed as if it had been waiting for her all along. I didn't ask her to stay. She didn't ask me how long I would let her stay. But the next morning, she was still there. On the thin, snowy field, I saw the tiny footprints of my boot, printed in a straight line from the barn door to the stable, then from the stable to the well, from the well to the kitchen. The familiar loop, and suddenly, in the usual silence of the camp, I felt something like a breath, something I thought would never come back. I thought maybe people don't need promises to stay together, as long as they don't leave, as long as they wake up early, light the stove, carry water, breathe in the same way, and touch the world with careful hands like Denise. Mabel used to be like that, but she was spring. And Denise was the first winter I wasn't afraid of. One afternoon, as I closed the barn door behind me, I saw Denise sitting on the barn step, sewing a piece of saddle leather. the sunset dyeing her lightly tousled hair orange. I stood there, not knowing why I felt a lump in my throat. Then, almost out of the blue, I said, I never thought anyone would stay with this camp this long. She looked up, no smile, no evasion, just, I have nowhere else to go, but I don't want to go anywhere. I nodded, as I always did, but this time my heart nodded, a nod that allowed something long dead to come back to life. It snowed that night, so much that the roof of the barn caved in. I had gotten up early, and before I could tie my shirt, I saw her out in the yard, shovel in hand, shoveling snow like a tireless person. I strode out, grabbed the handle, and frowned. I've got it. Let me. She stepped back, brushing her hands on her shirt. I can do it. I'll do it because I want to be here. That wasn't a request to stay. It was a declaration. A small tree stump had just taken root, not waiting for anyone's permission. Just stuck into the ground and clung. And I realized I didn't want to pull it up. A few days later, I brought an old rattan chair and placed it right outside the main door of the house, next to the chair I sat on every afternoon. Denise saw, didn't ask anything. But that night, when the sun was setting behind the hill, I saw her come, gently wipe the chair, and sit down, not looking at me. I didn't turn around either. We sat next to each other like two strangers listening to an old song. Silent, steady, and something like a common heartbeat. I thought about this. Happiness sometimes doesn't come from laughter, from kisses, or from roses, but from having someone every early morning quietly lighting a fire for you while you're still sleeping, by having someone sitting outside the door at dusk and not leaving. One day, as I washed my saddle near the stream behind the house, Denise came over and handed me the patch of leather. I took it. When our hands touched, she said, without looking, I've been abandoned many times, but I don't want to leave anyone behind. I took the patch of leather, held it a little longer, then softly over the sound of the stream. And I've lost people, but I don't want to lose anyone else. We were both silent, but from that moment, I knew we were no longer two strangers living temporarily in the same place. We were two broken pieces, quietly piecing together a nameless form. Winter will pass. Spring will come with the sound of melting ice and the glimmer of new grass. But I knew one thing for sure. This winter, the coldest, longest, and seemingly unbearable, had become the first season I was no longer afraid of being alone. Because for the first time in many years, I was no longer alone.